Welcome to today's episode of the Nicole B Show, where the truth comes with no filter, no fear, and no allegiance to power. It's time to join me as we flip the script.
Did you know that there's something called the Division of Revenue Act? On an annual basis, the Western Cape pays 200 billion rand to the ANC-controlled National Treasury. We get back a mere 50 billion rand on our local and provincial allocation. We're losing direct access to 75% of the taxes that we generate. If we were an independent country, we could cut taxes in half and still have double the money for schools, hospitals, policing, housing, infrastructure. An independent Cape would thrive.
Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Jack Miller, leader of the Cape Independence Party, a movement positioning itself as a counterbalance to the Democratic Alliance's dominance in the Western Cape. The party advocates for real local representation and holds to the belief that charity begins at home, that the benefits produced in the Western Cape should first and foremost serve the people who live there. Off air, Jack and I were chatting, and we spoke about the origins of the Cape Independence Party. So I asked him what inspired its founding and what niche it fills in an already crowded political landscape.
I think we're filling a niche that just doesn't exist and hasn't existed. I mean, the reason I started the Cape Independence Party, Cape Exit in 2007, so 18 years ago, was because I wasn't seeing in the DA and the Freedom Front and the ACDP the type of serious counter push that I felt was required at the time. It was very clear to me that the ANC was starting to drift away from this idea of a rainbow nation, and we were getting far more communist, far more totalitarian, far more racist type of language, more racist policies coming out. So it was very clear to us that that something needed to be done. And having I love history, having an understanding of South Africa's history, that South Africa didn't exist up until 1910, and in fact we're a colonial construct as a result of the British Empire forcing us into the Union of South Africa in 1910 after the Anglo-Boer Wars. So we understood that these territories which make up the Union of South Africa were all independent territories once upon a time. And so we were all independent for far longer than we've been part of South Africa. And I mean, the name South Africa is not even the name of a country, it's the name of a geographical location, south of Africa. And we were named by the British Union of South of Africa. So in 2007, we formed the Cape Independence Party because it was very clear that we needed to, we believe, look, I mean, we will accept that South Africa can remain as a unitary state if we have a massive overhaul of the political structure. We could have a federalist system where we decentralize power down to the provinces, and even better if we can decentralize power down to municipalities. Unfortunately, we don't see the appetite for that in the ANC and EFF and MK parties. And the DA, which claimed once upon a time to be a federalist party, we just don't see them taking actions which are in favor of federalism. And so it was at that point where we didn't see the types of policies and language and fight that we felt was required to save this beautiful place, to save the Cape, to save our home. And so that's why we started the Cape Independence Party.
I think the ANC is after centralized power. And that is the reason why, if you see more and more, the ANC has started to centralize power. And that is how you keep control of the purse strings and are able to do whatever you please without too much pushback, because the less power that you push down to your lower regions, the less say that people have. So I mean, that's communism really in a
Yeah.
nutshell, and socialism, but it's also kleptocracy in terms of the ANC. But are you surprised about, you've just said about the Democratic Alliance having favored um, federalism? Now all of a sudden it's off the table. And I remember Helen once saying it's Pretoria or nothing. So how has the DA lost its way so dramatically?
Good question. I mean, I was quite a fan of the Tony Leon DA back in the day, and yeah, when Peter Murray was in the DA, and so that was a DA that had a backbone, at least certainly part of a backbone. But over the last decade or two, they have drifted so far socialist, that yeah, it's really it's difficult to identify in them the time. And I've got to say that we've got good relationships with certain people within the DA. The DA as itself has got very good people who I think unfortunately are there simply because it's seen as the primary vehicle to oppose the ANC and the EFF and parties like that, which is part of the problem. People have lost their imagination, and so they just and they buy into the propaganda that the DA puts out that if you don't vote DA, the ANC will get in. People don't realize that here in the Western Cape, the ANC has got virtually no foothold whatsoever in the EFF. People don't know that in the last um, uh, LGE elections in Cape Town, which is over 70% of the Cape population, the ANC got 18%. The EFF got 4%. Together, all of the African nationalist parties, all of them put together, PAC, Azapo, BLF, whatever, all of these ones, wrap them all together. They're sitting at around about 22% in Cape Town. That's nothing. It's 80% anti these African nationalists, approximately 20% African nationalists. So, but if you look at other parts of South Africa, it's the complete inverse. The DA and the more sort of free market and rule of law parties are sitting at around 20% in other parts of South Africa, with the ANC and the EFF and MK forming around 80% in other parts of South Africa. But as South Africa as a whole, we know it's never going to be governed by anything other than African nationalists. People like to say, oh, well, look how the ANC's dropped and things have changed. Nothing's changed. All we've seen is we've got different versions of the ANC. You've got mild versions of the ANC, which you can say is probably the ANC today, and then you've got these more extreme versions of the ANC, which are breakaways in the form of the EFF and MK. So if you put all of those parties together, they're all sitting at around about two-thirds of the vote. So literally, when the ANC was at their peak at a two-thirds majority, it's no different to the situation now. You just compartmentalize them into ANC, EFF, MK. So that nothing has changed in South Africa. And people need to realize that nothing will change. We are going to be governed as a unitary state by communist, socialist, totalitarian, and unfortunately,
Ethno-nationalist?
ethno-nationalist, racist,
Yeah.
um, political parties, whether anyone likes it or not, and that's clear to see. And so the DA, in order to get in the ring with these political entities, have become ANC light. Their policies are ANC light. The way that they I mean, we've had some of the worst political policies imposed in South Africa in the last 6 to 12 months since the GNU was formed. Now, under the DA, we've got expropriation without compensation. We had the Bella Act, which is such an attack against the Afrikaans language. We've had policy after policy, which has been shoved down our throats under the watch of the DA. And it's hard to see how the GNU has delivered anything better. Quite frankly, it's worse now than perhaps it's ever been.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree totally. But that said, what is Cape Exit or Cape Independence counterbalance to that? How do you take what the DA has become and offer the voter something different? So, what I'm probably trying to get at is when your poor benighted voter gets to that ballot box and he's got a choice a mile long, why should he or she be voting for Cape Independence versus that of the Democratic Alliance, who often say they've been in power, look how well we've done in the Western Cape, etc., etc.
Well, I mean, you started by saying that you're interviewing smaller parties. I would say that if you're looking at the two sort of factions within South Africa, your African nationalists, which we've spoken about now, that's your EFF, MK, ANC. They're all sitting around about that 20% kind of mark. So together, they're all around 60%, or a bit higher. On the other side, you've got the DA, you've got the Freedom Front, ACDP, and ourselves. So Freedom Front, ACDP, and ourselves, for example, here in Cape Town, rule at around about that 1%, 2% mark, which might sound insignificant, but it's not when you look at the bigger scheme of things. All we need is for the DA to drop underneath 50%. So they're just a few percentage points above that currently. So if we can get them to drop to 49, 48, 47, and you've got the Cape Independence Party, Cape Exit, sitting on 2, 3%. You've got the Freedom Front sitting on 2, 3%. You've got the ACDP sitting on 2, 3%. Together, we would comfortably, because obviously we're going to form an alliance with the DA and not the ANC or the EFF. And obviously people, if they move their vote away from the DA, they're not going to move their vote to the EFF or the MK. They're going to vote for either Cape Independence, or they're going to vote for ACDP, or they're going to vote Freedom Front. So we're just we're natural allies. Those parties are natural allies. And people need to realize that they if they want a better governed Cape and Cape Town, they're going to have to get the DA underneath 50%. Because the DA, our problem in Cape Town and the Western Cape is that the DA is the equivalent in the Cape to what the ANC is in South Africa. They've had unchallenged dictatorial control over the Cape for the last 2 decades, and they've grown incredibly arrogant. They believe that they're always going to control the Cape. They use us as a tax cow to fund their ambitions in the other provinces around South Africa. And we can get into some of those numbers a little bit later. But they use Cape Town and they use the Western Cape as a tax cow to milk, to fund their expeditions to try and make inroads into the African nationalist strongholds. And so all we need voters to do is to be quite relaxed when the DA comes out with their terrifying propaganda and they say it's neck and neck, it's too close to call. If you don't vote DA, the ANC is going to get in. And people need to go, no, no, no. If you don't want the ANC to get in, you just don't vote ANC or EFF. As I mentioned earlier, they're sitting at around 18% and 4%, respectively, in the city of Cape Town, and similar to that on the province, a little bit more in the province, but nowhere near a threat to us. And so move your vote away from the DA to Cape Independence or ACDP or Freedom Front, and and then you can be guaranteed that you will have no ANC EFF government. And we just need to get the DA below 50. And then they're going to be forced to form an alliance with parties like Cape Exit and as I mentioned, ACDP and Freedom Front. And together, we're going to make the DA more accountable to the Cape voter and the Cape citizen and the Cape taxpayer. We're not going to put up with losing 98%. It is such a mind-blowing number. We pay 232 billion rand to the National Treasury, Cape Town. We get back as an unconditional allocation to the city of Cape Town, 4.7 billion rand. It is absolutely ridiculous. We get more back in our conditional allocations, but conditional allocations are dictated to us by national government, in other words, the ANC. So, for example, our budget that goes towards housing or policing, etc. If you look at these areas, housing, this is one of our big issues here in the Western Cape, is that a lot of the houses that are being built here in the Cape are not being built for people who were born in the Cape. Because of employment equity and because of black economic empowerment and all these racially discriminative policies, national government says, no, 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 South Africa is 80% black and 20% minorities. And so housing needs to be allocated 80% to black African and 20% to the other races. So that results in a situation here in the Cape where the vast majority who are minorities outside of the Cape. We're a majority here. We're approximately 70% of the population of the Cape, whites, colors, Indians, and Asians. And Afrikaans speakers are approximately two-thirds of the Cape. And I mean also the Greater Cape. I include the Northern Cape in that. And and ironically, even though two-thirds of the population is non-black in the Cape, the vast majority of houses are going towards people who are arriving in the Cape from other provinces in South Africa and simply getting houses because of their skin color. So we're entirely opposed to that. And our taxes are going towards that. So these are conditional allocations, and the DA goes along with this ANC policy. So we're sending all of our tax money up to the national government. We get back 2% on our city allocation. It's we then pay more in our municipal rates, which is another thing we're fighting the DA run city of Cape Town over, because our budget this year was 64 billion. So of the 4.7 billion we got back, we had to pay another 59 billion rand here in Cape Town to meet the DA's budget of 64 billion. So we're forced to pay on top of the 232 billion. We had to pay another 59 billion just to get enough municipal rates to pay for the services which happen here in Cape Town. Next year, they want to up the number from 64 billion to 71 billion. So we've got to find another 7 billion rand to put on the back, to burden the back of Cape Town taxpayers when we are losing 98%. So if we just kept, in my speech last month, if we just kept 3% more of that money that we are sending to national government, we would not have to raise municipal. In fact, we could have zero, absolutely zero increases in rates and taxes if we kept more of the taxes that we're sending up there.
Well, this is the one thing I wanted to touch on. So we've gone two steps forward, but I'll get back to one thing. Is that I hadn't actually been to the Cape, the Western Cape and Cape Town, for at least a decade, but I was there in March for about 3 weeks, and I must admit that I was quite horrified to see to what extent Cape Town had morphed into what used to be this nice sort of city with surrounding, Cape Dutch type houses to being almost one squatter camp.
Yeah.
And we get told, oh, you can't say that. But what my impression is, and this is what I'd really like you to comment on, is that under the veneer, under this veneer that the DA has pasted over Cape Town, there's no potholes, there's everything works, everything is great. Underneath is just this, it's almost like it's this mulch of extreme poverty. I drove through an industrial area and I decided to drive off where I was going. Literally, there's a factory and in between a small space of land, there's a squatter camp. There were
Yeah.
15 shacks. I
Yeah.
drove down another road, going down to Gordon's Bay. I couldn't throw a stone, and I'd hit a shack on every road, on every turn. And I'm thinking, how did they allow this to happen? How did you've got a 2.5 million rand house on the one side of the road? There were 3 shacks on the other, on a small square piece of land. There were 3 shacks. And I thought, don't even have this in Boxburg,
Yeah.
there's a veneer, and underneath it is just. And another thing is, I'd like your comment as well on the coloured population. And I passed through Mitchell's Plain, and then I'm thinking, it looks like a ghetto. It looks like these poor people have been corralled into these ghettos and are now at the mercy of drug dealers and gangsters. And I think that the DA is just ignoring these problems and just always pointing fingers at national government. Where's their responsibility? Where does it start? Where does it end?
Well, I mean, they're creating this problem, and just look at KwaZulu-Natal, for example. General Mkhwanazi, who's chief of the police there, he has done an absolutely fantastic job of cleaning up KwaZulu-Natal. And you won't find squatters on the side of the roads in KZN because the police there are serious and they don't put up with this. And similarly, the DA could do a much better job here in the Western Cape. They've never bothered. They've never bothered to take a constitutional court challenge to the Division of Revenue Act to challenge all of these issues. They just go along with it and they implement it because they are an efficient party. They implement this socialist ANC agenda far more effectively than the ANC can even do so. So we've really seen now 2 decades of this ANC light DA policy being implemented here in Cape Town and the Western Cape. And the worst affected by it is the colored community because under the apartheid government, I've heard this comment many times. Under the apartheid government, they say we were tweede klas burgers, and now under the ANC and DA, ons is derde klas burgers. So, they,
Yeah.
yeah, they're third class citizens, and they don't have opportunities. And so what happens when housing that's being built in the Cape is going to people that aren't even from Cape Town? What happens when you've got a community which has over many generations built its economy on the fishing industry, and they take away fishing rights from colored communities and they give them to these ANC, BEE national consortiums,
Mm.
and then you talk about, I mentioned the SAPS budget. You talk to our supporters in Mitchell's Plain, and they say you walk into the Mitchell's Plain police station, and the majority of the police officers there aren't from Cape Town, can't
Mm.
speak Afrikaans, don't speak English very well either, and have no care. They have no care for the community. The same thing when you go into the local, the Pick and Pay and the shopping centers there, they tell you that you walk to the tellers, and all the tellers are majority from the Eastern Cape, and they don't speak Afrikaans, and the vast majority of the colored population is Afrikaans first language. This is in Mitchell's Plain. And they also say that the schooling system is ridiculous because the teachers there are some of them, many of them are from the Eastern Cape, and it's a complete difference in culture and language, um, and so the colored community, and never mind just jobs. So I mean, the colored community aren't even being able to fill those teaching jobs. They aren't getting jobs in the police. They aren't there to cash out in the shopping centers, etc. A lot of these jobs. So you've got to, and then the fishing rights have been taken away. So that's another big source of income. So they don't have jobs. They don't have a roof over their heads because the houses are being given to majority blacks, and they're cut out of the economy. So you have a situation where obviously they're going to resort to the lowest levels of survival, and that's when you see gangsterism and crime and all these sort of things begin to emerge. And there's no future. There's a lot of despair in these communities. So it naturally results in the situation which like you said, you identified. They're living in these ganglands, and we certainly an independent Cape would rapidly put an end to this, and coloreds and the colored community need to return to their rightful place in the sun in the Cape, and they've been neglected for far too long, and they're the majority population. And in an
Well, this is what
independent
I was
Cape,
going to ask you, Jack. Do you have a strategy for drawing in the coloured community? Because I was going to ask, what is your strategy to push the Democratic Alliance below that 50%? And for me, it would be attracting the coloured vote. But do they see, sort of jumping from, the fire to the boiling water, sort of with going from the DA to you? What could you offer the coloured community that the DA is not?
oh, I mean, we would offer them a completely new life, a completely new society, and that's what Cape Independence offers. So it's not so much that's the issue. So let's look at the two main colored identity parties, the Patriotic Alliance and the Cape Colored Congress, who are now called the National Colored Congress. It's been very disappointing. They got a lot of their colored vote by presenting themselves as being in favor of the colored community, pushing Cape colored identity, and certainly we've seen, yeah, the NCC has really tacked in the direction of more African nationalists. I mean, certainly we see in the city of Cape Town, the Cape Colored Congress often sides with the EFF. I'm not too sure why that is. And then the Patriotic Alliance also, I think people expected a little bit more on the national level to hold the ANC to account. But there again, too, we're seeing the Patriotic Alliance, I think, getting quite cozy with the ANC. So,
Well, Gayton likes his international first class travel just a little too much for him to rock the boat, I'm afraid. So I don't think the coloured community can ever expect anything from the Patriotic Alliance, ever. Gayton has got himself a very cushy situation, and he's certainly not going to jeopardize that in any shape or form.
exactly. So that appears to be the case. That appears to be what's happened, unfortunately. That could change. That could change in time. Who knows? But at this point, it's been very disappointing to see both the Cape Colored Congress as well as the Patriotic Alliance not really deliver on the type of message which I think got them elected in the first place. So, I mean, we are the Cape Independence Party. We stand for the Cape people. We stand for the Cape culture, the Cape history. We believe in sound economic policies. We believe in non-racialism. We believe in merit. We believe in first come, first serve. We believe in charity starts at home. We believe in really basic common sense principles, which, when implemented, if you look at this all around the world, results in good economic conditions. So, to the countries which we look to as models for what an independent Cape could be are countries like Singapore and countries like Switzerland. So we like the politics of Switzerland and we like the economics of Singapore. So Switzerland survived through two world wars without firing a single bullet, with 26 cantons who are either German or French or Italian majority speaking, when you had France, Germany, and Italy killing each other at genocide proportions in World War One and World War Two. And why did they not shoot at each other in Switzerland? Because of decentralization. When you have decentralization, neighbors respect neighbors because no one's imposing their will on anyone else. And so we would want a similar political structure here in the Cape, because we do have quite different communities. We've got, for hundreds of years, we've got a big Muslim community, a majority Christian community who've lived very peacefully side by side for almost 400 years, very different to what we've seen in other parts of the world. And there's no reason why we can't maintain and keep this good Cape Cape community that we've built over 400 years. And so you need to decentralize power. You've got white English speakers, you've got white Afrikaans speakers. Who obviously there's a history there with the Anglo-Boer War, and before that. So you've got many different communities mixing with each other, and the best way to respect all those different communities is to decentralize power down to those local communities, and that's why Switzerland survived two world wars without any conflict. because French and Italians and Germans all respected each other because they respected their own communities and didn't impose their will on them. Then you look at a place like Singapore, which also suffered under British colonialism, just like we did here in South Africa. And Lee Kuan Yew took Singapore from the 1960s to what it is today. He did this in a decade. It was already well on its way to achieving this just by implementing good economic policies. And you know, similar to that is Hong Kong, where both Hong Kong and Singapore, if you take the bus or the train, you'll be in a very Asian sounding place, and then all of a sudden you'll be in Queen Elizabeth Street or whatever it might be, and they haven't gone about changing the names, tearing down statues, constant vilification of the British Empire. They've just got on with business and they've gone, okay, the British Empire colonized us. That's part of our history. They're not going to erase history. You can't erase history. They are a proud people and they've just focused on building powerful economies. Singapore, Hong Kong are absolutely remarkable, and that's what we would want to see. Just putting in low taxes, free market policies, and all the basic principles that result in growing your economy, as opposed to what we have here, which is a rapid race to steal anything that's not nailed down because they fear that in the next election they might be booted out and they're not going to have their snouts in the feeding trough.
Well, this is the one thing about Switzerland, and I think it's also what contributes to its success is that it is a high trust society and a melting pot at that. But they all still have a very similar ethic and a similar attitude towards one another. And that I think is one of the key to the successes of Switzerland is that sort of high trust society. You can leave eggs out and you can buy your eggs on the side of the road and you will leave your 2 francs or your 2 Swiss francs or your 2 euros or whatever and you will pick up those eggs and nobody will think about picking them up without paying for them. And I think that when you can create a society like that is when you've got a successful society because there's just mutual respect. Why on earth would I take these eggs without paying for them? And I know it's a simplistic example, but it is the underpin of Swiss society that makes it so successful. And Singapore was very much the same because I heard a talk on how they managed to stop getting Singaporeans weeing and spitting everywhere, because apparently that was a tradition, and to elevate society beyond that. And I think those are the two key areas that when people start respecting their country and respecting one another, you naturally create a society that is much better for one another. But getting back to Cape independence, Jack, where do you want to take the Western Cape? Are you really pushing for complete independence, as in a total different country, borders, and all the rest of it? Or would you prefer to sort of start with improving the economy of the Cape? And do you want to keep more of the money inside the Western Cape? And how do you foresee doing that if you don't separate it as a separate country?
Well, Cape Independence is the golden solution. It solves everything. So we can start from a clean slate. As I mentioned, we can start implementing the types of economic policies that Hong Kong and Singapore use. We can start implementing the decentralized meritocracy, non-racial policies that allow communities to be respected, such like as in Switzerland. Once we do that, it's literally we are off to the races. We're going to be the Switzerland of Africa. We're going to be the Singapore or Hong Kong of Africa. We'll be an amazing place. We'll watch property values going through the roof. You'll watch the economy, the Cape, if we call it the Cape Rand or whatever it'll be, will be a fantastic economy, a stable economy. We are at the intersection between East and West with and you've got Somalian pirates attacking the boats up there through the Suez Canal. Now everyone's got to come past us, and that might happen again in the future. And then any disruptions in the Middle East, they've got to come past the Cape. We should be an exploding economy. There's no reason why we couldn't be one of the best countries in the world. We certainly are the most beautiful country in the world, and there's no reason why we can't have an economy and a political system to match it. So Cape Independence is hands down the win all solution. But yes, absolutely. In life, you have to be open to turns in the pathway and different variations. You never know how it's all going to unfold. But the starting point is we need to get a legal mandate through a referendum. And we know that we have a majority. We know that the majority of people in the Cape, black, white, colored, Indian, and Asian, are all in favor. Well, in favor. We have a majority in favor of a referendum on Cape independence. So depending on the national climate. So I think it was 2 years ago. I think our highest numbers were sitting at near 70% of the Cape, black, white, colored, Indian, and Asian. 70% of the total population was in favor of a referendum on Cape independence. So our numbers are huge. If you compare us to other independence movements around the world, the numbers that we're getting are really on the upper end. So given a referendum, we would win it. We would get that majority. Then once we've got that, that's when the political aspect comes into play. That's when you start to negotiate. So then we negotiate with the national government. Where would the borders be? How would we deal with areas of overlapping interest and things like that? So that's the exciting part. That's the fun part where we begin to negotiate what the pathway forward would be. And also, if we are to remain as a unitary state, then that would be part of the negotiation chip. So we would put that mandate on the table. Here's the referendum. We got 55% or 70% or 80%, whatever it was on the table. We say here the majority of people in the Cape want the Cape to be an independent country, but we if you drop Black Economic Empowerment and you drop Employment Equity Act and you allow us to keep, instead of losing 98% of our taxes, you allow us to keep 90% of our taxes, you can have 10%, something like that. Who knows? Then negotiations become possible. But we don't see the appetite or the inclination amongst those national parties. In fact, they're moving more extreme as opposed to being more moderate. And yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. But the goal certainly is Cape independence.
What are you going to do if you do get this, if that's your gold standard, and let's say hypothetically you get your independence one day, within the very near future, what will you do about what the current blight of the Western Cape anyway is this sort of unchecked migration of people, because the Eastern Cape is getting poorer, it's getting worse. It is an ANC stronghold. The minute you put up that border and the Western Cape starts to flourish, you're going to have sideways movement. I mean, half of Africa's moved to South Africa because, of course, we are far more prosperous than those countries north of us: Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, Zambia, Malawi. I mean, the list is endless. How are you going to counter that? Are you literally going to put up a fence and have border control?
Yeah,
That I
certainly. I
think
mean,
is going to be one of your most difficult, you know.
yeah, certainly we'll have a strong border. And many countries around the world do this. I mean, if you look at the European Union, I think it's Hungary and Poland or some of those countries on there, which are basically the front lines to preventing illegal immigration into the European Union. So, I mean, there's many countries around the world which do it, and so yeah, we certainly will have a border. But also, the rest of South Africa, or I think they want to call it Azania now. So we'll see what the name of the country will be. But we intend to have good working neighborly relationships. The only reason it doesn't work is because we're forced into a unitary state. So we expect to have good friendships with the Eastern Cape, good friendships with KwaZulu-Natal, good friendships with the Free State, good friendships with these other territories, and we plan to trade, and we plan to hopefully we'll get our energy production up rapidly. We expect to. Then we'll be happy to sell electricity if it's required to those territories, and we want to get our agricultural produce up, and there's great agriculture outside of our borders. So we plan to buy some of that produce from the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, etc., and the Free State. So it's that's not going to change. What's going to change is the political situation, and so the way that we can protect our citizens within the Cape is, yes, a border is important, but it's actually it's the least important of all the mechanisms to protect your population to their birthright, to the resources of the country, to the economy of the country, to the services that the government provides, etc. You protect that by putting in economic conditions which are incentives. There's incentives for companies to hire people that are from the
Yeah,
Cape and born in the Cape, um, and then natural incentives for them not to hire people that are in the country illegally. So you can hit companies with fines if we have home affairs going around and they discover that they're employing people that aren't Cape citizens. Then those companies will be fined, and yeah, so various, and then of course we're going to put an end to the discrimination of the Cape people, and when these freebies that have been handed out by the DA Western Cape government and the DA Cape Town government, those freebies are going to come to an end. So as I mentioned, we believe in first come first serve, and charity starts at home. So if someone's been on the housing list for 20 years, it doesn't matter what their skin color is, they should get a house over and above
yeah,
someone that's been on the housing list for 6 months.
yeah.
And even worse, what we're seeing is people that are arriving and illegally invading land violently and putting up artificial shacks are getting houses based on the way that the law is written. They have to provide houses to these violent, illegal squatters because the courts say that you cannot evict them unless you provide alternative housing. I mean, have you heard of anything so ridiculous in your life? If you want to create an incentive for violent land grabs, well, there's your law. That's the law we have. So, and because these people do it violently and there's an urgent status to give them accommodation and housing, these people are leapfrogging our majority Cape colored communities who have been on the housing list for 20, 30, in some cases 40 years, and and getting houses over and above them. So we'll put, I mean, that'll come to an end in day one. We'll put in very harsh laws for anyone breaking the law. We'll re-empower police officers. We'll re-empower communities. You can't have police officers sitting on the side while massive mobs are threatening the lives of people. That's when tear gas and rubber bullets need to come out en masse and force, and just quell these uprisings. And you do that a handful of times in the beginning, and then these people who think that violence is a solution and a method to achieve their ends will rapidly learn the hard way when we clamp down on them so harshly that they won't be trying those methods again in the future. So yeah, a combination of good economic policies, good political policies, and a strong border we're not concerned about illegal migration.
There are remarkable parallels between the UK and the Western Cape as you explain the situation, because recently Emmanuel Macron came to the UK and met with Keir Starmer. And he basically, that they're trying to do a deal where for every 5 or 6 migrants that make it across the channel, the France will take a few back. But he turned around, Emmanuel Macron turned around to Keir Starmer and he said, your problem is that you've made coming to the UK too attractive. You put them up in hotels, you feed them, you give them money, you give them a cell phone. Why wouldn't they come? If you stop making it so attractive for them to come to this country, they will stop coming. He said they're leaving France because Keir said, why are you leaving? Why are they leaving France? They're leaving France because we don't give them anything. You give them everything. And I think this is exactly the problem that the Democratic Alliance, they have created this rod for their back in terms of the fact that they have accepted all of these people who come invade the land illegally. And then because they know we will be given priority for a home and a house, which the ANC will not give us in the Eastern Cape because the ANC doesn't care,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So I think the DA has created every single problem that it has in the Western Cape. And it is cheap politicking for them to turn around and say, it's national government does this and national government is problem with this. You have created the environment in which they come, get a house, why not? As I want to start, I think, sort of closing off, Jack, as we discuss a little bit. I just want to raise one or two last issues in that, with regard to Cape independence. Now, tomorrow, the tariffs coming from the United States, and there seems to be absolute and utter inactivity, and I think I'm putting it nicely. I mean, just this laissez-faire attitude towards what is going to be quite economically catastrophic, and especially the Western Cape, the wine industry, citrus fruit, the sort of level of agricultural exports and that. How do you feel about what has happened, and what do you think the impact is going to be on the Western Cape?
It's going to be horrific, and the DA and ANC they are the ones who need to carry the can on this. I mean, you had John Steenhuisen. He had his opportunity sitting there in front of the most powerful man on earth,
Mm.
and when the American government and the American president was showing blatant evidence of what's happening in South Africa and how bad the situation is, Steenhuisen chose to take the ANC's side. He chose to side with Ramaphosa and say, no, 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 there's nothing wrong in South Africa. It's a misunderstanding, this and that. He had his opportunity. We're being governed by absolute idiots in the form of the ANC and the DA, and they drove us to this situation. I mean, I wish I could say something positive about this. And I just need to look at the voters and go, well, you voted DA and you voted ANC. Here we are. We at the Cape Independence Party would have taken a very different tack if we were sitting right there in the Oval Office with the US president and the US administration. And I don't think we would have had any tariffs. I mean, in fact, I can tell you, and an independent Cape, we will cut, we would negotiate um, with the US administration that the Cape Republic, the Cape of Good Hope, an independent Cape Republic, we would slash our import duties to from America down to zero, and we would plead and beg that they would do the same for us. We don't believe that the citizens of our own country should be paying more for products that are coming in, and we don't believe that they should be punished for their hard work and productivity sending their products, exporting it overseas. So we would negotiate for zero tariffs with the United States, and we would be happy to not impose any tariffs and taxes on their goods. And my understanding is that the U.S. administration has reached these types of agreements with other countries who've shown a willingness to partner with one of the, I mean, hands down, the biggest, one of the biggest economies in the world between America and China. And so the ANC and the DA have absolute, they could not have done a better job of resulting and causing the situation. The ANC and the DA caused this situation. There's no reason for us to be in this mess. And yeah, it's bad. It's bad news. It's bad news.
I recently spoke to a political analyst. I won't mention who it is, quite a well-known person, um, just in case it was a sort of an off-the-record conversation. But his view with regard to the DA was that they have played the long game, that Helen's struggle credentials, Black Sash, etc., was that eventually they could split the ANC and that they would eventually absorb, the ANC and become a sort of a more centralized, centrist type of party, but with like an African feel. I mean, don't you think that that's thoroughly naive when you're dealing with almost a militant leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist sort of establishment within the ANC and any other party that could come out of it? Because most of those in the ANC are your radical economic transformation lot. And I'm not really sure whether Cyril is just playing a game or whether or not he's actually there to either destroy the ANC, make the ANC, or just protect the ANC. But how do we view the DA in light of how they've become, and therefore decide that this is genuinely not party that they say they are anymore?
Hmm. Yeah, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we've had the DA governing the Western Cape unchallenged for 2 decades now. And they've had absolute power for these 2 decades, and their arrogance shows it, and their ANC light policies show it. So voters are going to have to, at some point, either accept the demise of their futures, the demise of their children's futures, the demise of the economy. They need to accept these tariffs that the most powerful economy is now smashing us with. They need to accept expropriation without compensation. They voted for a party that did not do anything meaningful to stop expropriation without compensation or to stop the Bella Bill becoming an act, and to continue to go along with these absolutely economically destructive policies and racist policies. So yeah, if the grand strategy was to become so socialist and African nationalist that ANC voters would not be able to distinguish between the ANC and the DA, then yes, I have to agree with your economist friend. The DA has done a very good job. But then you have to ask yourself the question, well, then what are you voting for? You might as well just vote for the ANC.
Right, Jack, as we end, last, why should we vote for Cape independence? Just 2 minutes, just retail or regale the most important points. What really is it that you stand for? What's your manifesto? What will you do for the voter if they vote for you in 2026?
That's not 2 minutes. So they can check out our manifesto at www.capeexitparty.com. They can refer to some of the things we spoke about earlier in tonight's beautiful discussion. What they need to know is that a DA above 50% is arrogant and unaccountable. A DA underneath 50% is accountable and respectable and will be fighting for their best interests. So what they need to do is they need to choose a partner who can knock the DA underneath 50 and make them a better party. So we at the Cape Independence Party, we stand for the types of principles that will grow the economy. We believe in merit. We want to put an end to racism. We want sound economic policies that is going to bring the country out of the mess that we're in. And they can go through our website and they can make contact with us if they'd like to find out more. But our manifesto goes into it in good detail. And the key is that there's no hope for South Africa. South Africa's finished. So if you look back at the last 31 years, the ANC either had a two-thirds majority or you have got near a two-thirds majority for all of the African nationalist parties together. So don't buy any story that the ANC's now dropped below 50, so now something has changed in this country. Nothing has changed.
No.
It's instead of being ANC two-thirds, it's ANC, EFF, MK two-thirds. Nothing has changed. In fact, it's gotten worse because the EFF and MK are a lot more extreme than the
Yeah.
ANC was 20, 30 years ago. So people need to realize that South Africa's finished. It's done. It's over. If they're happy to live in Zimbabwe, well, then that's what they've got. That's what they've got in South Africa. If they want to see a positive change in the right direction, they in the Western Cape, they're going to have to knock the DA underneath 50%. Get them to 45%. Vote for the Cape Independence Party or vote for the ACDP or vote for the Freedom Front, vote for one of the other parties besides the DA. And obviously, these people aren't going to vote ANC or EFF. Those are your options. And let's knock the DA underneath 50%. And by knocking them under 50%, we'll then form an alliance with them because we do have the vast majority. The vast majority of people in the Cape do not vote ANC or EFF. Almost 70% of the Cape population, the broader Cape population, is white, colored, Indian or Asian, or speaks Afrikaans as a first language. And we have a large black population that also speaks Afrikaans as a first language and doesn't want to see the types of economic destruction that we're seeing under the ANC. So, as I mentioned, the majority of people, black, white, colored, Indian, and Asian in the Cape want a referendum on Cape independence, but many people vote for the DA because they see them as a better governing party than the ANC. But all this means is we're putting plasters on the Titanic as the ship is going down. So if we want to really fix things, Cape independence is the only answer. And that's what we've been pioneering for 18 years, and we'll continue to do so. So the way to achieve this is not vote DA, vote Cape Independence Party, or another pro-merit, pro-free market type party other than the DA. Section 235 of the South African Constitution, the right to self-determination. Any territory that shares a common cultural and language heritage has the right to self-determination. Not only in the South African Constitution, but in the United Nations and African Union charters, to which South Africa is a bound signatory, which guarantee our right to independence. All we need is 50% plus one in a referendum, and we can declare the Cape an independent country, the Cape of Good Hope, the Cape Republic.
To my listeners, thank you for joining me. If you found this discussion thought-provoking, help us keep the conversation going. Hit that follow button on Spotify and don't forget to connect with me on X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, stay curious.